Today's guest is not just a devoted fan of Nightmare on Elm Street, he literally wrote the book on it. Talking about this one right here, Wayne Byrne is a writer, educator, and film historian. His recently published book, Welcome to Elm Street, is available at mcfarlandbooks.com, Amazon, Barnes& Noble, all the places. And if you're a fan of Elm Street, even if you've seen every making of documentary and watched every single YouTube interview about the films, you should have this book. Wayne's in-depth research and candid interviews takes you through the series in such a gratifying and enlightening way with equal parts nostalgia and never before told details surrounding the films we grew up loving. We'll get into all that and more right now. I hate admitting this, but I really I don't dislike reading. I love to have read. I hate reading. Something about sitting down and the discipline that it takes to not look at the phone and turn off the TV or just I feel so good when I'm done with a book. And I'm so happy that I've read it, but it's such a hard thing for me to sit down and actually do it. So I'd say that to say that um, I I did not. It was my own self discipline that prevented me from sitting down with your book for so long after you sent it. But when I finally sat down with it, it was your book that kept me sitting down until I was damn near done with it. Is I heard a lot of the stories that were in the book, not a lot, a few, but even the stories that I was familiar with, you had you had such a interesting perspective, and the people that you were interviewing from the films, like they shared things that I had never heard before. Just sometimes just little details that would that would put you in that time and place a little bit better than anything I've ever seen or read before. It was really good. Like you, I got into Nightmare on Elm Street when I was, you know, too young to really appreciate those socio-political undertones that Wes Craven was weaving all throughout his stories. I was older when Scream came out. I was a little bit older with People Under the Stairs, and that was a little bit more in your face with the stuff. So I knew that Wes Craven was, you know, that was a theme in his films. But for me, even knowing that Nightmare on Elm Street, because I came into it at such an early age, I just kind of I've always remembered it and appreciated it for the things that I fell in love with it at, you know, 6, 7 years old. How cool Freddy was, how funny Freddy was, how, you know, amazing the death sequences were. And it wasn't until reading your book that it really made all those things apparent, that what like I've always felt these things instinctually, like why Nightmare on Elm Street has always been my favorite horror franchise. It felt different, even though it was in the same vein as Friday the 13th and Halloween. Something about it felt a little bit more thoughtful, and I could never really put my finger on it until reading your book, and you had really like articulated that in such a strong, you made a very strong case for just how smart of a film it is disguised as a slasher piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when you look at other big horror franchises of the 1980s in particular, I don't think there was as much depth in them, and I don't think they were as imaginative either as well. So that was one thing about Elm Street in general. I think that drew you in. It was the ideas that are floating in there, as Robert England said in the book. When you're watching these movies as a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, and you're enjoying the pizza on the couch, you're not looking for those themes. You're not aware of them, but they do you do take them in, and you do become aware of them over time, and especially as you revisit the films. And that's exactly what happened with me. As you said, I came to these movies when I was like 6 or 7 years old. So it's only over time that I realized, there's something deep at work here. And I've kind of an interest in kind of sociological stuff anyway, especially in art and movies and stuff. So for me, it was ripe for kind of analysis and for discussion.
Yeah.
And it's just
Uh,
I think it's one of the reasons why that franchise has kind of lasted, has kind of lingered into culture as long as it has, because I just don't see that kind of level of depth in other horror franchises.
Yeah, I mean, right at the core of it, it's like it attacks everything that like Friday the 13th, it's like I can avoid that easily. I just don't go to summer camp. Easy. You know, Halloween, it's like I don't have any psycho family members that I have to be too concerned about. But Nightmare on Elm Street, it's like, I have to go to sleep.
Yeah,
You know, that there he's taken the one place of solace that we have, and not only it's like you Freddy is gonna come for you eventually. You have to go to the place that Freddy is, and
yeah,
just the genius of giving yourself a nightmare landscape to create a horror film on. That's where, like, it justifies, like, Nightmare on Elm Street can be as outlandish as all those other slasher films, but the very core of like the concept of it justifies all of the outlandishness, because like there's no reason for Mike Myers to keep coming back to life the way he does in reality. But Freddy Krueger can do whatever the hell he wants because he's operating in the dream world, and that's just like if I was another horror filmmaker aside from Wes Craven, I would be so I'd just be so jealous that he came up with that concept to make horror films.
yeah.
It's just so genius. But I like went way off the rails because I knew this was going to happen because I love the series so much, and haven't even got. We'll get there. Before we do get there, I wanted to ask you, how long have you been writing, and what inspired you to start writing?
Well, I've been writing for 10 years now. I started in 2012, and the reason I started writing was because my favorite director was Tom DiCillo. Brilliant, brilliant director. He's kind of most well known for Living in Oblivion, which is kind of a, kind of a piss take about independent filmmaking. And of
Mhm.
course, he did Johnny Suede with Brad Pitt. It was Brad Pitt's first major role. He did Box of Moonlight. Wonderful films. And he was my favorite director. And every time I went into a bookstore, I would always ask, is there any books on Tom DiCillo coming out? Ever since I was young and I discovered his movies, that's what I would always ask. And the answer, of course, was always no. Now, because he is an important director in kind of the trajectory of kind of contemporary film history. He made some important works with Jim Jarmusch, Amos Poe, and Eric Mitchell back in the kind of the American, well, the no wave scene of New York City in the early 80s.
Mhm.
So he's referenced a lot in kind of movie encyclopedias and other books, but there's never been a full book written about him. And I wasn't great in school, and I've been turned down from every college I ever tried to get into to study either literature or film. And even as a mature student, as an adult, I still couldn't get in. And at one stage, I was just frustrated, and because I thought you have to go to college if you want to, like, be a writer or talk about movies in some authority.
Mhm.
And after being turned down from one college too many, I said, you know what? I have words. I can put them on paper. So I'm just going to write this book. And I was able to contact Tom through his website. And I said, listen, Tom, I have the idea for a book. If you'd be interested in having me talk to you about it, can we talk about the movies? I'll interview you. Whatever. And Tom was very receptive to it. And he actually said to me, if you can come over here to New York for a week or so, we'll really get down to the nitty gritty, and we can spend a day talking about each movie. And I was blown away because this is
Yeah.
my favorite director right here, who's inviting me over to his
Uh,
place in New York. So I just set out. I said, okay, that's it. That's the foundation. I'm just going to write this book, and I had no intention of. I didn't know how would it ever be published because I didn't know how to write a book. I was never a big reader. I was always a watcher. I spent my time watching movies, so I
yeah.
didn't read that many books growing up. And I still don't read that many books. I only open books really when I have to, research or whatever. But I said, okay, this is it. I'm just going to write a book and see what happens. So after I came back from New York, armed with a wealth of material from talking to Tom, we spent literally a day each on each of his 7 movies. And so that was the foundation of the book. And then Tom said, hey, why don't we talk to Steve Buscemi and a couple of other guys and see how it goes? So he introduced me to pretty much all the main actors from his movies. And Steve Buscemi actually ended up writing the foreword for the book and making of stuff. And there was one publisher that I had in mind that I thought, wow, if I ever had this book published, I wanted to be part of this. And it's Columbia University Press. They have a series called Director's Cuts. And each book kind of has the same format and layout. It's a really nicely designed series of books. And they're really serious deep dives into their directors. They're really serious pieces of work. The only thing that kind of made me a little bit afraid was all the authors in that series are like serious academics. They're like, PhDs, they're filmmakers, they're in the industry somehow, or they're writing about it. And here's me with no background whatsoever. So I just took a chance. I didn't know how to get it to Columbia University Press or to get it to any editors. I didn't know anybody, any editors. So I took a chance. I cheekily sent it to some kind of random office admin address, office at Columbia UP, whatever. So I
Yeah.
said, I'm just going to send it to that and say, hi, I have an idea for director's cuts. Here's the manuscript, the whole thing. Again, I didn't know anything about approaching publishers. Can you please send this to the editor that might be interested? And then about a month or 6 weeks later, I got an email back saying, Wayne, we love this book. We'd love it to be part of the series. We don't want to change a thing. And I was like, what?
Wow.
And they said the only thing we would like to do different, or not even different, just to put in there extra, is can you do an additional intro? Because I already had an intro. And they said just a few words, kind of putting it into context for our kind of academic readership and for students to say, this is why Tom DeCillo is important. This is why these films are important and worthy of study. So, of course, I was like, absolutely. So I put in that extra intro, and the book is published as I sent it, as I finished it. Not a word of
That's
a difference.
amazing.
And I couldn't believe it. So it took me 5 years to get to that point where I was happy. And when I interviewed all those people. So 5 years of working away, plugging on it, and then it got published. And I literally haven't stopped writing ever since that got published, because that book then led on to my next book. And, 6, 7 books later, here I am.
That's I could not, I could only vaguely imagine the excitement of going to spend a week with your favorite director to just soak up, like, your purpose is to just ask away and get as much information as you can, like all the things you've wondered. Like, we've had I really like Mike O'Connell. He's one of my favorite directors. He did a Living Wake. Is a an indie director, but I just admire his work so much. And
Yeah.
I remember we he agreed to come and do it, to do an interview over Zoom, and I just know how I felt getting to pick his brain and look him, virtually in the face for an hour, and have that experience was, I mean, that I remember thinking, like, I don't care what else happens with this show. Um, this experience alone, it has made it all more than worth it. And yeah, but to go and to hang out with somebody you admire so much for a week and just talk shop with them, and then meet people like Steve Buscemi and stuff, that had to be such a that just had to be such an incredible experience. I'm sure there was no challenge finding the words to to
No, I mean, it all came kind of, it all felt surreal, and then there was one night where Tom brought me out for dinner, and I just had this realization. I'm sitting here in New York on the Upper West Side, having dinner with Tom DeCillo, something I just never, like, couldn't rack my brains around it. 13-year-old, 14-year-old me who adored
Yeah,
this man is just inside screaming. But it was just, and Tom has become, such a good friend, and one of my best friends, and we really kind of we got on so well together, and he's just been a part of my life ever since. And that's
that
one of
is
the
so That's so cool, and surreal is the perfect way to describe it. So, I was gonna bring it up later on, but David McGiffert, want to say thank you to him for hooking this up. That's a surreal experience for me. Is sometimes I'll a casual text thread with David McGiffert, and I'm thinking, what life am I living that I'm just talking to David McGiffert about, how was your day? And this guy, like, I grew up watching Rain Man and Back to the Futures, and now, like, now the assistant director of those films is sending my daughter a birthday card. This
oh,
I was like, you can't. I would have never 3 years ago, if I would have told myself that something like that would be transpiring today, would be,
yeah. Well,
I just wouldn't have believed it.
that's David. He's one of the nicest people I've ever met, and that's another. I always say, whenever anyone asks me about writing books, and what's the best thing about them, it's the people you meet and the friends I've made. And David's another example of that. I met him through my Nick McLean book. So it's just, David has become such a huge part of my life as well. I don't think there's rarely a day goes by where we don't text or talk, email, whatever it
Yeah.
is.
He's
You know.
a genuine soul for sure. And that, yeah, same here with the show. I admittedly, we started it because I saw, there's, teenagers that are paying their parents rent off of YouTube monetization. So that was like what, you know, what informed me to try something on YouTube and to start a show. But it was like 6 months after we started, and you know, the people that we got to talk to, it's like this is just such an amazing experience to get to talk to talk to the people who make the movies we love about the movies we love.
Yeah.
Like if this channel never turns a dime, it's already paid so much. So I could definitely appreciate that. I was also interested. When I saw you're a film historian, I was wondering what that entailed. And like my first thought was imagining like boxes all over your house and a storage unit with like, you know, labels and yarn connecting things to stuff on bulletin boards. Like what does a film historian mean for you? Like what how does what's that how does that
It's
play into your daily life?
it's kind of a cover-all label, I guess, for everything that I do, which is including writing books. And I guess from that perspective, as I mentioned before, my approach with these books is kind of documenting people's words who have never gone on record, about their work on these films. It's writing books about directors or filmmakers or artists who have never been written about. So you're kind of contributing to the discourse, on film history and just expanding film history by getting these stories on paper. But also because I teach film history as well part time. I do work in some colleges and some schools. I've been doing that for the last 10 years. So it's always kind of film history based. So, I'm teaching kids going back to like the silent days, talking about D.W. Griffith and John Ford and Raoul Walsh, people like that. So just the birth of cinema and the trajectory of cinema through the golden age and the new Hollywood and things like that, the independent movement that Tom came from. So film history is very much my thing, and I think Elm Street is just another part of that.
Hmm.
I would never say I'm not just kind of into horror or anything like that, or I'm not just into say 70s new Hollywood movies. I love the entire history of cinema. So all the books I've done so far are very different, and you're talking about very divergent types of directors. So
Yeah.
it's all just contributing to the history of cinema, and that's what excites me. That's my life is kind of film history. So.
That's really cool, and I love that you went from feeling, inadequate in your profession because of your, lack of, college experience or, academics, and now you're, teaching what you do to, academia.
Well,
That's a beautiful
the
thing.
funny thing was happened there not too long ago because I'm a librarian by profession. So there was a girl came in one day, and she had no idea who I was. She asked, "Have you got a book called The Cinema of Tom DiCillo?" And I said, "We normally do, but it's out at the moment. And by the way, I wrote that book." So she was like, "Oh, no way, that's weird." And it turned out that she was studying in one of the colleges, one of the big universities here in Ireland, that turned me down. So now I
Wow,
found out that my book is actually on the curriculum up there, even though
that's
there's no one.
awesome.
So I thought that was pretty cool. But
And, like, a
yeah,
direct reward, like because you were asking that very same question, years prior, and, and you got to be the one to change the answer to that question for somebody else. Is there a book on Tom DiCello?
absolutely. Yeah, and I was so happy. Like I was raging that it wasn't there on the shelf to give to her. So I said, "Listen, hold on, I'll go get you my copy of the book." So I went and I got her one of my own copies and gave it to her. So I
That's
was just
so cool.
I was just happy that she could access it and that she can study Tom up in this university and she had access to the book and kind of learn all about it. I mean, that's exactly why I do this. It's to kind of just encourage discourse and debate, about these filmmakers and movies that I love.
Yeah. Um, well, we're getting into Nightmare on Elm Street now, back in the Nightmare on Elm Street, and so I felt a very strong connection to you when you in the book you were talking about how you got into Nightmare on Elm Street when Freddy grabbed your attention at your local video store. It was 1989. You were 6 years old. I was also introduced and enamored by Freddy around that same age, and the same year. Are you like 39, 40?
I'm 39 in a couple of weeks.
Okay, yeah, I just turned 39 last month. And I it was right around the age of 6, 7 that my cousins got me into Freddy, older cousins. I have a daughter who just turned 7, and I like I've tried to, like, introduce her to Freddy. She's terrified just by like, I have the doll, like, I have to hide the doll usually because she doesn't even like the sight of him, gives her the creeps, and it's curious to me, like, why why do you think people like us were attracted to Freddy at such a young age?
Well, I think there's several reasons for that. I think one of them is probably one of the most obvious is he was actually marketed to us. Strangely enough, I mean, when you think about it, he's a horrendous, child killer. And I used to go to there was this budget store in my town called Donald's Walk Around, and you guys probably have an equivalent. It's like I guess like a dollar store kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Everything's in there. It's really cheap. So yeah, I used to go in there when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, and you could get your Freddy Krueger lunchbox, your Freddy Krueger doll, your Freddy Krueger glove. The toys which were aimed at our age group, which was very strange now when you think about it.
Yeah.
But so apart from the fact that he was marketed to young people, I think one of the crucial things is two other things. One is the films are so imaginative and so much fun. As I say, compared to some of the other major horror franchises, there's a lot of imagination in there. There's a lot of surreality. So
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's cartoonish, but I think there's an element of playful visuals which appeal to kids, younger people who are used to say the kind of wild anarchic world of cartoons. There's an
Yeah.
element of that. And I also think because Freddy Krueger has personality, he's not just this faceless killing machine with a mask. He has the one-liners.
Prime time, bitch!
He can be very witty and charming, but he can also be, very cruel and whatever else. So
Let's get high.
I think there's multiple reasons why he would appeal to us at that age. And for me, I think it was Freddy's Nightmares. I really have to kind of credit the TV show because I used to watch that. It used to be on every Friday night on this channel we had, and it was just around about kind of my bedtime. So
Mhm.
I'd get my dad to record it for me, and then I'd watch it on Saturday morning. So my Saturday morning cartoons was Freddy's Nightmares.
That's
So
the
you know,
'80s, man.
yeah,
A very
and
special time.
the thing about that show is it's kind of like a Twilight Zone kind of situation where Freddy's not really involved in the stories, but he is the host. He's the wraparound guy, and he pops up every now and again between halfway through the show, and he'll say something funny. So there was an element of him being this kind of inviting, creepy kind of guy who was funny as well. So you liked him. It's
Yeah.
only as you got older and you understood what he stood for that he
Yeah.
became creepy. But for me, he was just a cool guy to watch every Saturday morning.
Yeah, that was me too. I never really looked too much further into it than, I don't really care how he got to where he's at. I'm enjoying what he's doing where he's at. It's fun. It's entertaining.
Yeah.
It's prime time, bitch.
Mhm.
I really resonate. Well, Robert England's statements kind of on this subject really resonated with me. Your book very appropriately ends with a beautiful, thoughtful paragraph from him. He was talking about how Freddie lives on because so many of us grew up with him from such a young age, and we associate him with the pleasant memories of growing up, like gathered around the TV with loved ones, eating pizza, like that. Freddie for me does have that nostalgic place in my heart. That's the that you can't be disconnected from that era where things felt a little bit safer in a weird way. Like, we could go out. I don't know. I wanted to get into this with you too, but like because A Nightmare on Elm Street takes place in suburban America, and I was wondering how that translated for you. Like, was that like that's like my neighborhood, or is it for you as like, oh, that's what it's like over there?
Yeah, I guess there was an element of that where I grew up. It wasn't quite as how'd you say white picket fence America kind of style, imagery, but similar kind of housing estates, where everything was kind of nice and quiet and a lot of families. So it did resonate to a degree. But as I mentioned in the book, I think one of the great things about the teams of Elm Street is, it's the phrase Freddy's phrase. Every town has an Elm Street, and I think it comes down to the fact that I don't, it doesn't really matter if it's a poor, economically deprived housing estate or a middle class one or a bourgeois upper middle class, whatever, they all suffer from some of the same afflictions. Broken homes, divorce, addiction, people with issues. It doesn't really matter what kind of economic situation you're in. I think you can relate to some of the issues that are in Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, when I was young, very young, and I was watching these films, of course, those weren't necessarily things I was thinking of. But yeah,
Yeah.
something on the visual level did strike me as familiar. That it was just kind of nice, quiet, tree-lined streets, and it's like, yeah, it could have been my neighborhood, could be anywhere, and it's the
Yeah.
kind of thing that it does resonate on a kind of some kind of subconscious level, that you're living in that same kind of environment as the characters are, and that
Yeah.
your neighborhood could be invaded by something like Freddy Krueger.
What was the like I'm sure like there's the obvious answer that you're a huge fan of the series from a young age and it had an impact on your life, obviously. But what was there a particular like reason why you felt it was time in your career to focus on the Elm Street? And I'm sure that it had to be an like an undertaking because of your love for the franchise and wanting to,
Yeah.
give it the best justice that it could possibly be given. Like, I'm sure that it had to be an undertaking to look forward to. Like, how'd you realize that you were ready to do that and that you wanted to write that book?
Well, it had been kind of an idea in the back of my mind for a few years, and I have taught about it at classes. So I've spoken in depth about at these things in kind of academic contexts, and plus I've written about it for magazines down the years, for anniversaries and stuff like that. So it's not my first time kind of talking about it, writing about it, but I always felt I was never really satisfied with the kind of level of analysis out there on it in the other books that are out there. A lot of them, as I said, are more about the making of aspect of it, and kind of interviewing all the familiar faces and, what they did with the character and all that kind of thing. And that was never really what I was interested in. So when I had the opportunity, if you notice with each of these books that I'm doing, I'm kind of paying tribute to my childhood and all the movies and filmmakers that have informed who I am today and what I do. So, Burt Reynolds, my favorite actor, Tom DeCillo, my favorite director, Nick McLean, one of my favorite cinematographers. So it's come around to, my favorite horror, my favorite franchise, that kind of thing. And just because I had the opportunity, now that I'm able to be published, publishers or editors, they seem to like me for whatever reason. So, I've been kind of successful when I go to them with pitches and ideas. So I went to my publisher and they really liked the idea and they said, yeah, go for it. And in terms of like the scale of it, ever since the Tom DeCillo book came out, every book I take on, I give myself a year, because I just like I like the pressure of it. It kind of gets your ass moving, to get the interviews done, get the prose written, get everything, get the photos together. I think if you take any longer than a year, it probably gets a bit sluggish. I mean, a year is a long enough time to be working on one subject, because
Yeah.
I don't know about any other writers, but when I'm writing a book on whatever subject it is, that's all I kind of live with for that year. So for a year, I only lived with Nightmare on Elm Street movies or Wes Craven movies. It had to be associated with what I do. If I'm working on a book, I just can't switch off and put on any other random movie. It can only be related to the book. So I kind of get obsessed for a year, but it
Yeah.
works. It works for me. I don't know. That would probably be too quick for some other writers, but
Uh,
I was lucky in that I got some good people on board and I got great interviews. And like, when you get good interviews, sometimes the books, it helps write the books. They write
mhm.
themselves really.
Yeah, I really like that idea of giving yourself a year, like putting a cap on it
Yeah.
to because yeah, yeah, I feel like that's a really smart idea, especially when you're dealing with something that you love so much, because it could easily become an obsession that, like, you know what, I'm doing a 12-volume encyclopedia set on it actually, and it's gonna be my whole life.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's probably like, and you also know that this is, yeah, like you can fully dive in and 100% commit knowing that there's an end game, like you'll get to come out of the water and watch some other kind of movies in 365 days. That seems really smart, a really smart approach to it. I might have to borrow that with some things because
Yeah.
yeah, that's sometimes something that makes it so hard to start is not knowing when you're gonna like
Yeah.
so many creative projects. There isn't really, unless it's self-imposed, there's not really a deadline or an end game. You just
Well,
kind of
it's I feel blessed to be able to do it because I had that kind of difficult way in to get here. I just while I can do it, while publishers and editors like me enough to release my work, I'm going to do it. So it took me so long to get to that point of the first book, to say, no, nobody's going to release this book for me. I'm gonna have to do it myself. So that was my approach. I wrote a book that I wanted to buy. And so that's been my approach ever since, and I'm just taking the bull by the horns. Every
mhm.
year when I come to the end, near the end of each book, I start thinking about the next book and I try and get a deal for that. So it kind of rolls straight into the next project. So I don't really have a whole lot of time to kind of celebrate one release, after another. I kind of once I finish the Elm Street book, I'm gone straight into Walter Hill, and once I finish Walter Hill, I'm gone straight into something else, and that's just the way it's been, and that's the way I really like it because, as I say, I never thought I'd be here doing this, so I'm just going to keep doing it while I can, while my body allows me to stay up as late as possible.
That kind of alludes to a future question that I had. But I might as well throw it in here now. Like towards the end of your year of writing the current book, do you just kind of start like my question was going to be like how do you know what the next subject matter is going to be? Do you just kind of like just let your mind be open in those last few months or leading up to as you're finishing up a project, just to
Yeah.
see what speaks to you?
Usually it's something natural. It's a desire inside that just I feel, compelled to work on or write about. As I say, like with Elm Street, once I was kind of wrapping up that, I was watching a lot of Walter Hill movies and I was thinking, why is there no books on Walter Hill? The man's been making movies for 50 years and there's no single tome covering his career. So that just felt natural. And you kind of have to think, am I going to be happy doing this for a year? And if I don't question it, well, then I know. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? There's sometimes you might think of a director or a certain series of movies and you go, well, how happy am I going to be just spending a year on this subject? And if I don't question that, say with Walter or with Elm Street, well, then I know it's the project for me. Now, my next project, the next book that's coming out is different because I'm co-writing it with somebody and they were the one who kind of, the genesis began with them. So, but again, I love the subject and I love my co-author. So that was just natural. But in terms of coming up with the ideas, it's generally something instinctual. It's a passion within me, and it's all these people and all this art that I feel should be written about but hasn't been. So I'll just do it.
Yeah, that's I've done a few feature films, and that's really how the next one comes to mind for me too. Is I um something in me just feels ready to dive into a feature film again, to write a script and go into a 6 to 12 month every weekend production, and spend a year in post production. Like it's a commitment. So I never go into it lightly. But even with that said, there's really not much like logical analysis that goes into it either. It's just it's more or less a feeling. Like first, it's a feeling of I'm ready to do this again, and then it could be as simple as riding around in the car and a song comes on and I just get inspired, and it's an idea and I may have 3 or 4 ideas, and I don't beat myself up if they're not the ideas that end up getting meat thrown on them and turning into something that tangible, because like it's the idea that finally sticks, that moves me enough to take the next step, is the one that I know that I'm going to be able to commit to for what the rest of the journey requires to see the finished movie at the end of the day. So I could definitely appreciate where like you can't really, like, you could maybe have a Excel spreadsheet of potential ideas, a bucket list of ideas that you want to do, and even with that list in front of your face, the universe or whatever we want to call it might have a completely different idea for you that inspires you to just move to go with that one right now, and it gets number one when you didn't even consider it before.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's the only way to approach work. I think unless you're literally looking for something to do for financial gain. I mean, I couldn't imagine spending a year on a book that I wouldn't my heart wouldn't be in. And I've toyed with some ideas, and I even started a project at one stage with a publisher, and I was like, okay, this isn't it's not going to work. It's not for me. It just wasn't coming together, even though it was something I was kind of a movie I loved, and I just thought this is going to be a slog. And you
Yeah,
see, you have to remember as well, when you're approaching these projects, everybody you bring into the project has to be at that level. You know what I mean? I think, the people you're interviewing and everything else, or the people you're working with, they have to have that same passion about your subject, or else things are just going to falter along the way. So, I've been
yeah,
lucky on the projects that I have worked on. I got great people on board. I think I've only ever done maybe one or two interviews that I ended up not using for whatever reason. But on the whole, I've interviewed, I think
yeah.
over 100
Well,
people at this stage, and they've all been gems.
well, with Welcome to Elm Street, you talked to dozens of people responsible for bringing the Nightmare franchise to life, from all the series, the the TV, the series with the film series, the TV series, across the board, cinematographers, directors, makeup effects artists. Um, I'm sure all of that was amazing, but I'm really curious what it was like to speak to. I just couldn't imagine talking to Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger himself, on the phone, and I feel like I will get. This is as close to reliving that experience as possible, as asking you how you felt, because I feel like our relationship to Freddy Krueger is very similar coming up.
Oh man, it was surreal because well, first off, he rang me, so there was the whole kind of anticipation of waiting for the phone to ring to pick up and answer Freddie. It's
Yeah,
just this completely weird thing. But Robert England is a writer or interviewer's dream. He loves to talk, and he will talk for hours about everything and anything. And one thing we really got off course a lot of time. You wouldn't tell it from the interviews in the book because they're very, we pick out the parts we wanted. But for that conversation, we went off topic talking about Ireland because Robert loves it here, and he was telling me about these restaurants that he goes to in Dublin. Tell me about the menu, about the fish that he does get, and the white wine. And I know these restaurants, so it was kind of a little thrill, knowing that Robert goes there. But he knew about my Burt Reynolds book, and he was interested
nice.
in that because one of Burt's movies that I talk about is one of my favorites, which is Hustle, 1975 film noir, which is really good. And Robert has the distinction of being the only man, or at least the first man, to kill Burt Reynolds in a movie. So, Robert's a small bit part as a villain. In the end, he kills Bert's character. But so he was talking to me about that, about Bert, and then he said, send me a copy of your book. I want that book on my shelf. And I was like, that's weird. I was
Yeah,
like, I'm gonna be signing and sending a book to Robert England. This is crazy.
yeah,
Well, I did, and he got back to me. He said he loved it. He thought it was brilliant. So, it was one of the highlights of my career to date. Just
that,
getting to share a couple of hours with Robert and just talk about Elm Street, but also just talk about other things, and chat about Ireland and just life. He's a really great interviewee, and one of the things I was so happy with was because you also have to, because of my approach to this, the kind of, like I say, the sociological stuff. Not everybody you interview sees the series like that, or wants to talk about the teams and the intellectual ideas. They might just want to talk about what they did on a particular movie, which could be special effects, or it could be just their acting, or it could be whatever. And that's
mhm,
fine. You adjust accordingly. You get the temperature of the interview fairly quickly. But Robert met me on that level precisely. He is all about the sociological stuff, the political stuff, the subtext, the themes, because that's what him and Wes used to talk about in the early days of coming up with ideas for the character and what it was all about. So
yeah,
Robert, as you know in the book, gave me some great stuff about that. I mean, he talks about the genesis of Nightmare on Elm Street going back to the assassination of JFK and the civil rights
yeah,
movement and the cultural upheaval of the 60s. I mean, I was in heaven listening to that because that's exactly the kind of stuff I wanted to talk about. So to get Roberts, he was a dream.
And
Absolute
that's
dream.
and he does it in such an articulate way. Like if like when I was reading about his stuff about the tying it back to the JFK and being like the death of uh
American Innocence.
yeah, yeah, like that being conveyed by the wrong person could easily be like, "Oh, come on, man, you are stretching big time." But the
Yeah,
way he lays it out is just
yeah,
so like, "Holy shit, you're right. That's you've got a compelling argument there."
yeah.
And I've always been surprised, like, I don't remember, like, in my teens when I first started seeing him in interviews and how articulate he was and, the respect and the reverence that he applied to the craft of acting, even when bringing a character like Freddy Krueger to life, his deep like, he had a methodical approach to the character, and it was so cool to see that when he, talk about, the way he would think about, playing the role and what different things entailed. But it's strange. I haven't actively sought out like as much as like Freddy Krueger is one of the most impactful figures of my childhood, easily. Like Ferris Bueller, Freddy Krueger. Those two probably were like made up the whole of my personality. It could be summed up in those two. Um, but I like, and usually when somebody has a really strong impact on me, like a director or an actor, I get on IMDb, I see everything else they've done, and I just go down the rabbit hole and I become a diehard fan. But Robert Englund, it's weird. I love his work as Freddy Krueger, but I've never sought out Robert Englund films. Um,
I
so I
was
don't
thinking,
like to admit it, but I think my allegiance ends with Freddy as much as I love Robert. Like, what's your experience been as far as Robert Englund? I know you talked about you love the Burt Reynolds film where he's the only person to ever kill Burt Reynolds on screen of the first, but have you do you consider yourself a Robert Englund fan?
yeah, I think he definitely adds something to the screen whenever he's on it. He has a huge personality and a huge screen presence, even though he's quite diminutive in a way.
This is God.
He's not a large imposing figure, but there's something about the way he carries himself on the screen. He knows the screen. He knows. I think he's aware of how he looks. You know what I mean? I think he plays with that. He's in the tradition of like James Cagney or Peter Lorre or something like that. Great
Mhm.
character actors who were like quite thin, quite not necessarily tall or imposing, but they knew how to play the screen so well, just in their movements, minor movements, really kind of. I think that contributed to Freddy Krueger, the
Yeah,
way he
his
walks,
theatrics.
the way he carries himself, the way he carries the shoulder, the arm with the glove. There's something
Mhm.
about the way he kind of nearly drags that, which is incredible, and it's all kind of theatrical kind of mime work on Robert's part. But in terms of his career, yeah, I've seen him in so many movies down the years. Going back to like the '70s, Buster and Billy, Saint Ives, and of course there was the TV show V, which was on when I was a kid watching. When I first discovered Freddy, I also discovered V around the same time, and I was kind of like the name kind of twigged at me. I was like, Robert England, that's Freddy, even though I'd never seen his face before. So that
Mhm.
was kind of a thrill. I used to love watching V and just waiting for Robert England's parts to come on each week because I just wanted to see Freddy without his makeup. So, Robert's been he's been in so many movies. Big Wednesday, A Star Is Born, the '70s version. There was a TV show back in the '90s called Nightmare Cafe, which didn't last too long. There was one season, I think, or a couple of episodes, but he was really good again as a host of that. So he's
Mhm.
just an incredible personality, and he's like that in real life. There's no when you see Robert England in an interview and he's talkative and he's animated. That's Robert in real life, and it's incredible. And as you say, he gave credence to those sociological discussions because if it just came from me and nobody else kind of reiterated them or agreed with me, I might have looked a bit silly because here's me, a 30 odd year old Irish guy writing about American innocence and the '60s. But Robert was able to say, no, you're right. That is exactly what it's about. And so for Robert to say that gives me or my theory credibility, at least, to me, I think it does. But,
Yeah.
he went there and I was so happy that he did.
Yeah, and it tied perfectly into the narrative that you started forming right in like the first pages, the introduction of the book. It to see Robert England come back and like um build on that and so effectively. Yeah, it was kind of like I did that was one of the things I did not expect to get out of the book. I was like, okay, we're gonna get some cool behind the scenes stories,
Yeah.
how the filmmakers felt about different things, some candid moments. But it was really cool to get that very like introspective view of the series from Freddy Krueger himself, and then elaborated on throughout the book by you as you broke it down in detail. It's just it was very it was very thoughtful, just as like the first film was. What was the most challenging part when it came to writing Welcome to Elm Street?
I think I would say the most difficult chapter I've ever had to write in any book of my career was the one about part three, or at least it's the section about part three, because I was dealing with a lot of voices. You'll probably notice, I think it's either the biggest or the second biggest chapter in there, along with Freddy's Nightmares.
Mhm.
And there's so many voices, but there was a lot of conflicting personalities as well. It wasn't a very happy set. I don't know if you've talked to Roy Wagner yet. He might elaborate a bit more on that. But
Okay.
there was that movie was a strange mix of, you had older Hollywood veterans, unionized veterans working on it, and they do things a certain way by the book, as expect, as should be, whatever. That's the way they work. But then you also had the non-union guys, the young guys who were coming in. They were kind of coming off that kind of, they were working in the new line independent spirit of just, let's just get this, let's just make the best damn movie ever, whatever way we can. And so there was a bit of conflict there between kind of, I think, the old guard and the new guys coming in. And I wanted to be respectful to everybody. I did not want bitching to go on in the book. I didn't want one person to be dogging another. And there's a bit of argy bargy, I think, in there. Some guys have their opinions about other guys, but I never let it be one sided, and I hope it doesn't come across as one sided in either respect. So just balancing those voices and balancing my own prose within that.
Mhm.
Again, I didn't want it to go sidetracked into this. Oh, it's kind of the behind the scenes gossip kind of thing. Did not want
Yeah.
that. I never want any of my books to be like that. I always want them to remain respectful to the subject matters. And at the end of the day, I respect all of these guys. I'm friends with some of them, so I didn't want any of them to feel, oh, damn it, fucking, you let somebody, bash me in that. So just putting that chapter together with an idea of fairness to everybody was probably the most challenging writing experience I had. If anything, David might remember this. I actually sent it to David because I was so kind of torn up about the chapter that I asked David would he have a look, and of course, no one better, to have a perspective on working on a set, be it
Yeah.
a commercial mainstream movie or a smaller independent movie. David would know what it was like. And he told me, no, this is really, really good. You're doing the right thing. So I was happy with that. So I think that was it. I think that was the most challenging thing about this book, but also the most challenging experience I've had probably on all my books, was just putting that chapter together with a view to be fair, with a view for it to be not one sided in any direction. And I just, at the end
Yeah.
of the day, I love these movies, and I wouldn't want the book or that chapter to be tainted by kind of backstage gossip, that kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally get that. Like it's a fine line. I realize that we play this with when we do interviews with people as well. Sometimes things will be said and it's like they're not really saying anything that like for anybody that's worked on a production set and appreciates like the level of intensity that's going on there and the stress, like, they'd hear somebody say something and they'd understand, like, okay, that's within the context of that environment, and
Yeah.
it makes sense there. In the real world, in the daily life, in a cubicle job, that would be like, "You're fired. How could that's so disrespectful." But in the intensity of a film set and everything that's going on there, some stories are like, they're totally justified. Um, but then, I try to remember that people will be watching these interviews that have no idea of that context and how they might perceive that or how they might make them think of somebody in a negative light when it really shouldn't be conveyed that way. And it's this fine line of like being respectful to the truth, but also keeping in mind the perspective of the audience, and not like
No.
tainting something that
Yeah.
that we're here to celebrate. Yeah, it's that's a that I could definitely see that being a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I mean, on part three, a lot of people, they said, working with Chuck Russell, it was Chuck Russell's first movie as a director, and they said, he was hard. He was a taskmaster. He was a kind of a hands-on, pushy director, but he was, as Roy said in the book, he was one of his great director cinematographer relationships. He just, the man had a vision, and also, like Robert, I loved talking to Chuck because Chuck had that kind of Wes Craven esque kind of intellectual understanding of the series and what it was about. And he tried to honor that as well as making, a fun, entertaining step up in terms of just the spectacle of everything. He just wanted to
Yeah,
make a damn good horror movie, but he also wanted to honor the themes of Wes Craven and all those kind of intellectual ideas. So I really loved talking to Chuck Russell. And again, I didn't want it to be a Chuck Russell bash fest because you could easily let it go, become one of those things. I've seen it in documentaries where people were a bit kind of down on him, whatever. And I was like, I just want this to be fair, and
yeah,
I want it to be about the movie because at the end of the day, the end goal was let's just make the best damn movie, no matter whether they were the older guys, the younger guys. They just wanted to make the best damn movie they could, and I think they did because it's the best film in the franchise.
yeah. Yeah, easily. Yeah, well, I'll get into what my I really like Freddy's Dead, and I noticed you had some things to say about that one, but I enjoyed Freddy's Dead for what it was. But yeah, Dream Warriors was always the most. It was so conceptually fascinating to me that where they went with Dream Warriors, how you could um, build these strengths to defeat Freddy, and like it was just they expanded on the lore exactly the way a sequel should.
No,
Um, the Going back to the original Nightmare on Elm Street, the open and shot, that was so cool to me when I was reading your book to learn that that was practically all in camera. Even the speed change and the haziness, how he used Jacques Haken. Am I saying that right?
yeah,
Okay, how Jacques Haquin, the cinematographer, he literally hand painted the pieces of glass that people were pulling to create that haze, and that about how they had that prototype device that was they were probably the first to use it to auto shift the iris with the speed that was never used before on a film set, and then doing your research for the book, like was there and the interviews as well, was there ever something that like stands out to you that was mind blowing in any particular way to hear like some like and I'm sorry if I gave the example that was going to be yours, but that's what like blew my mind because I always assumed that there was some kind of digital trickery going on there.
well, as a cinematography buff, that was actually
I'm
probably the
sorry.
one where I'm like, I was like, wow, this is fascinating because I don't know what it is about cinematographers. There's something on every book. I always try and talk to cinematographers because they have one foot in the technical world and another foot in the storytelling world,
Hmm.
and that's exactly what Jock was about. Jock said himself in the book, "I'm a story guy." So he would, you know, before shooting starts, he would have those kind of thematic discussions with Wes or with Jack Shoulder. But he says, once you're on set, it's get the shot. You're not going to be having those esoteric discussions while you're on the set. You're too busy setting up the shot. But he says those are the ideas that informs his shots, beforehand. So Roy Wagner's the same. Roy Wagner's a brilliant person to talk to about story and about how lighting and framing, informs and embellishes certain themes and parts of the story. So I always love talking to cinematographers. I'm trying to think, is there any other moment like that stood out? But I can't really think of it at the moment.
Fasc
But
Fascinating was the perfect word. That's the, that's I was very, very fascinated by that whole just the, how he went so specific into the, like, technical details of how he accomplished that shot was so gratifying to read,
yeah,
just because, like, you know like, I don't ever think that ho like, a big Hollywood picture is like doing makeshift stuff like that to pull something off creatively. I always assumed that like because like everything that he talked about in that paragraph of how they accomplished that shot, um, somebody could somebody could do right now with their like they could pull that off with enough practice, and that you don't need $100,000 to accomplish that shot. And that's just so it's so cool
That's
to
what you miss about the 80s. Like, that everything was in camera. It was
yeah.
performed for real. And as you said, it was five guys on the camera, all working in sync, doing whatever it was to achieve that. But, it pays off when you look at that shot. I mean, a prime example of the difference between those kind of effects works versus, the kind of contemporary kind of digital effects. Look at the remake, which you probably tell in the book that I'm not a fan of. If you look at shot for shot, say go from certain scenes and compare them, and the difference, the remake, even though they spent God knows how many tens of millions making it, looks like a cheap ass cartoon. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? It does not look good at all. It looks like the cutscenes from a video game or something. But then you go back to the original and you think, this is all in camera. It's done with lighting. It's done with framing and body positions, whatever else. It's done for real and done a hell of a lot cheaper than they did for the remake. And I think that's a prime example of why the 80s and the 70s and the 80s were such good eras for especially horror filmmaking. Because
mhm.
you knew even sometimes if it looked a little bit cheap or a little bit dodgy, it was still done for real.
It was still something you could touch. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, even the best CGI right now, it's removed from it still removes me from reality, because there's like I still there's something instinctually in me. It's like I can't touch that. That's not tangible. It has no real threat or impact on um but yeah, the practical effects were always so good. Now, I want to we're going to like fan out for just a few minutes here. I have just a few like quick questions about the franchise. What so you said number 3, Dream Wars is your favorite in the franchise, right?
oh yeah.
Okay,
Now
so that's
I have a couple of ones which kind of nearly tie for it, but
what's your honorable mentions?
okay, of course, part one.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of part six, Freddy's Dead.
Mhm.
I just think I know it gets bashed completely for its weird sense of humor and all, but for me, again, there's a lot of really good stuff thematically in there, and I love all that kind of '90s pop culture references, to Twin Peaks, to Simpsons, to Roseanne. And I even really like the soundtrack. I mean, the Goo Goo Dolls stuff in there is terrific. It's before they
Yeah.
kind of went into the middle of the road and tried to sound like Bon Jovi light, but
Mhm.
the early Goo Goo Dolls stuff was quite good. Iggy Pop's on the soundtrack. It's really fucking cool movie. Part four, I think, is up there as well. It's just a great big action spectacle. It's the MTV one. It's the one with
Yeah.
the kind of the pop and new wave soundtrack, the really flashy visuals. Steven Fireberg was the DP on that. Really loved talking to him. He was great. And again, he comes from an art background. He comes from he comes from the same indie world as Tom DiCillo. So to see him going from having worked on these really low budget, 16 millimeter indie movies, art movies in the early 80s, to doing this beautiful Hollywood studio horror movie is really fascinating for me. But I think the ones which are lesser for me would be part five, The Dream Child. I think it was just too heavy handed, too gothic, and just too, again, interesting themes, but maybe not dealt with in the way. It's not very, it's a bit on the nose, the whole kind of the abortion stuff, the single mother stuff, it's just not handled very well because they get into some deep things and then all of a sudden it's just a cheap slash and hack 'em up, whatever, the next
Mhm.
moment. So I don't know, something about it I just never really connected with. Part seven, I think, is ingenious in terms of the way that it's a meta movie. It's the kind of an intertextual kind of thing. It's not. I look at the franchise, at the formal franchise, as 1 to 6, and I think New Nightmare is a little bit kind of on the periphery of it. I would never
Yeah.
consider it 1 to 7. So Freddy versus Jason, it's fine. I'm not a huge fan of it. And then the remake, good luck. But yeah, I would say three number one. Three is number one for me, circled by part one, part four, and part six.
Yeah, I'm very similar to you. Like I love Dream Wars is my favorite. I love Freddy's Dead, and your book actually explained to me what I couldn't explain to myself, why I appreciated Freddy's Dead so much, and it was that David Lynchian aspect to it that I couldn't even put words on, that that's what was there, that I was appreciating so much about it. But it was, they like adding the Lynchian aspect to it almost made reality as unsettling as the dream world was, and then they took the murders of the dream world and just upped the ante and the creativity and the outlandishness of those even more to
Yeah.
contrast the Lynchian reality that was happening in that movie. And I love the death scenes. I love the video game sequence. Like, it was easily the most I've ever laughed at A Nightmare on Elm Street, and really enjoyed the ride, like right from the beginning
Oh,
with the bus and the guy falling so violently through the sky. Um, yeah, it was just such a fun. It was a hell of a ride.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, but yeah, I do have to say another honorable mention is Part Two, Freddy's Revenge, which, I know it's been kind of celebrated again in pop culture in the last few years for its kind of the homoerotic stuff, and it's kind of
Mhm.
like the male scream queen. But apart from that, just thinking about the series now, it was probably the one that I wouldn't say scared me. I was never scared by Elm Street, but it's the one that freaked me out a little bit more than any other one. There's a certain tone to it, which
Yeah,
is it's very hard to describe. I think Jack Shoulder did a really great job. It's not a Wes Craven type Elm Street movie. There's something different about it. It's more physical. It's more body horror. It's kind of almost Cronenbergian, if you want to put it like that. But
yeah.
it's definitely the one that unsettled me the most. So honorable mention Part Two. It's not in the bottom half. It's not in the top half. It's in between.
Yeah, and I've seen people really like get upset with the fact that, like, Freddy just casually makes his way into the real world and attacks people at the pool. But for me, I remember, like, that was terrifying and it was so exciting. I'm like, "Oh shit. Now he's here." Like, it was just so neat to see,
Yeah.
and the way they brought that. But yeah, I agree. That one is probably, aside from the first one, is the scariest in the franchise to me, because there is this just very it's a very dark undertones. Even Freddy is like, he's still got the one-liners, but even his one-liners are kind of
Yeah.
threatening. And
And his makeup is actually quite frightening in it. I think it's of all the makeups, there's something about it. He's very emaciated looking, or there's something, I don't know, bonier about it. I don't know. I can't really describe it, but there's something about his look in that film. His eyes feel bigger. They're not as kind of enclosed with the mask as they usually are. But it's yeah, like I'm not too picky about kind of the whole coming into the real world thing. I that wouldn't upset me too much. I'm not that hardcore,
yeah,
to kind of, not like the film because of that, those kind of things. So you take each film on its own merit, you know what I mean? So
it was just really cool to I think what made that so cool to me is I feel like Freddy deserved that moment, because in most of the time, with nightmares, he can only most like attack one person at a time. It was just so cool to see him, like, bust into a pool party and unleash his hell on everybody at once. Like, you're all in the nightmare. The nightmare has come to you.
yeah,
That was just so neat. And with Freddy versus Jason, I think I get everything that people say about that. The criticisms are all very warranted. I think why it holds such a special place in my heart is because my older cousins actually got me into Nightmare on Elm Street. They live up north in Pennsylvania. I lived down south for most of my life, and we went back up north around the time that, the holidays. I think it was like November, December, when that movie came out, and we went and saw. I actually got to go to the theaters and see the movie with my cousins, that got me into the franchise to begin with. And it was just a cool experience, and being in the theater with all the Freddy fans that haven't been in a movie theater together in a decade.
yeah,
That was like, the energy of it, I think, lives with me more than the movie itself does. It was really crazy when I read your book. That was surprising to me that the director, like, I remember like, the way I felt when I saw that movie is like, "Oh, man, this director really gets the spirit of, like, what the first Nightmare on Elm Street was about." Like, I felt like there were a lot of great callbacks, and then to see in the book that he, like, intentionally tried to avoid pleasing the fans of the original franchise and in like a certain way. Like, you know, he didn't want to just that was crazy to me to see that because I didn't get that. I didn't get that at all from watching it, and maybe
Yeah,
it
I
was
mean,
just because of my experience.
yeah, I think no matter how kind of how do you say how much your allegiance would be with say either Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, I don't think no director is ever going to satisfy the fans 100%. You're always going to have a contingent who are, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you're breaking the rules there, that kind of thing. So he probably knew that, you know what I mean? Kind of coming in cold is probably the best perspective to just, again, just make the best movie he can from the script and not worry too much about, you know, the kind of minor details. And because you're crossing over two franchises that are really not related at all. They're in different universes, they're
Yeah.
different approaches to horror and, you know, whatever. One's kind of based in reality, and then the other is kind of based in the dream world, and then you're never going to satisfy everybody. So I think it was a good approach to have, but just as a movie, it was thrilling to see those two guys, you know, on a cinema screen together, you know. But as a movie, it didn't satisfy what I like about both of those franchises on either level. To me, like the Friday the 13th, what's great about Friday the 13th is those first up to maybe, you know, the first eight. And I do like the Friday the 13th franchise. They're kind of gritty looking. You know, they're cheap, and there's a certain gritty quality to them. They're not polished. They're not beautiful looking movies.
Yeah.
So I missed that because Freddy versus Jason is very well shot. It's a beautiful looking movie. And in terms of Nightmare on Elm Street, it didn't have really any of the themes that I love about the Elm Street. It didn't really. There's not a whole lot of depth there. It's, you know, it's a team slash 'em up, whatever. Now
Yeah.
there is a nice kind of reference to the medicated teens of Elm Street and kind of the hypnosil thing that they're kind of being administered. That's a nice kind of throwback to part three, you know, and the
Hmm.
Dream Warriors and all that. But other than that, it was kind of lacking in what I like about both franchises, even though it's a fun hour and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, and the CGI didn't really hold. CGI never really holds up that well. I mean, that I that the one thing I do remember really distinctly from that film is Kelly Rowland's nose when she's that I was like, oh my god, why is the blood in a different frame rate than the film that it's being
Yeah.
shot on? That's so weird. What are you doing? Um, what's your favorite Freddy line in all the franchise?
I quoted it earlier on, but it's every town has an Elm Street. And again, it's because of the resonance, and that's from Freddy's Dead. It's the resonance that it has for me. Just it comes back to why I wrote this book, and it comes back to why I love the series and its ideas, which is that yeah, every town does have an Elm Street. You know, not by name, but just by what Elm Street represents, which is broken families, broken dreams, aspirations. You know, for a better life. You know, kind of the middle class American dream, which is kind of torn
Hmm.
asunder by this guy who kind of represents, you know, the hinted at other side of the tracks in Springwood. You know, he was a factory worker or whatever he was. You know, he was definitely kind of more blue collar than we are used to seeing in the Elm Street franchise. So there's a kind of a social tension there, I think, as well, because if you look at all these kids, they come from very kind of, you know, ignorant households, I would say. You know, they're medicated, they're kind of shunned aside by their parents who have their own issues as well. And I think that can, as I say, that can apply to any street in any neighborhood, regardless of economics, you know, or
Yeah.
country. You're going to have damaged kids, damaged parents, but you'll have people who are trying to do good, but they just can't quite make it. I think that's one of the great themes of Elm Street is that Freddy is the great disruptor. He's the guy who's, you know, you have your nice suburban tract house with your preened lawns and picket fence. Well, guess what? I'm going to come in and fucking ruin your life, you know.
Yeah. I think.
And he represents a lot. He represents, depending on which film you're looking at. He like in Freddy's Dead, for example. He represents the ignorance of the father. You know, the rich father. You know, kind of casting his kid aside and treating him like an object. He represents to Tracy, you know, sexual abuse, the abuse of the father on her, and you know, the abusive mother, the physically abusive mother with Carlos.
Yeah.
He's actually in that film. He's actually quite geez, he's quite vindictive. He really goes for the kids who had it hard. You know, in the other movies, he goes for those, like I say, those kind of comfortable middle class kids who have the rich parents. You know, usually their affliction is daddy's not home because he's at the office all the time. But in Freddy's Dead, the parents are there and they're really, really, you know, vicious to the kids. So it's a different kind of depiction of the parents, I think, in Freddy's Dead, but it's a very interesting one. But I think that's why Every Town Has an Elm Street is my favorite Freddy Krueger quote because of what the universality of what it means, you know.
Yeah. I think my favorite line is I think it's Dream Warriors where he says I am eternal. Just the delivery of that line,
Yeah.
and I feel like it's almost like a premonition of Freddy's legacy in the real world. Is that he's at this point he is like you have the Universal monsters from back in the day, and he reigns supreme over the slasher films of the 80s and 90s, or yeah, the 80s and 90s, and I don't see him. I feel like he'll always be a part of the zeitgeist of society in some way or another.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that line is great in the context of that movie as well, because there's a lot of religious imagery in that. And the whole thing of I am eternal, you know, there's a certain kind of religious connotation to that.
That's right, he says
Um,
it in a church even.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's that, which again adds that other layer of subtext to that movie, which is all this kind of religious, you know, kind of imagery and iconography that's going on. So that's what I'm saying. These films are really, they're very rich for analysis, you know, and that's why I guess why I was able to get a book out of them.
Do you have a favorite kill or dream sequence?
Oh yeah, the marionette sequence in part three.
Oh god,
That
yeah.
was the one years ago when I was a kid watching that. I think it was the only kill that ever kind of made me wince because
Mhm.
I'm terrible with like kind of, you know, medical stuff and body horror, if you want to put it like that. So that, you know, seeing the open wounds and the veins popping out and all that, Jesus Christ! But it's so imaginative. It's such a great scene. I love the way the Angelo Badalamenti's music kicks in, the real
Yeah,
80s synth score, just as kind of Philip is walking and the guys notice him. It's a very exciting scene, and I think the image of Freddy in the sky as he's dangling Philip, you know, by the veins, Freddy consumes the whole sky, and that's a terrifying image because
yeah,
he's so huge. He's just it's like you can't escape him. He
yeah.
is sky. He is air. He is the elements. You know, I think that's just a wonderfully achieved scene from a filmmaking point of view as well.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with you on that. That was the most effective. It was not funny at all. There was nothing really humorous about it, but it was terrifying. Like, I don't know, have you ever pulled the hangnail too far,
Oh
and
yeah,
there's that moment where it hits the skin and maybe pulls up like, "Oh, stop, stop."
yeah.
Like, that the his tendons being pulled up like that, it gives me the hangnail feeling over my whole body just
Oh
thinking
yeah.
about it. Like the practical effects of that was done so well. And even with Freddy in the sky, for like to pull off like a comp shot like that in the 80s and not have it be like distracting like that, it felt like a nightmare. It was so yeah, that's a very good one. And the most disturbing easily because the implication of that too. I mean, the kid's in a psych ward, and he's like that. It's just so taboo to
Oh,
you know he to frame somebody for their own suicide that's in a psych ward. Like, god damn, Freddy, you don't get much more evil than that.
no, and again, it comes back to what Freddy represents, which is absolute and utter horror. You know, it's horror in the home, and it's horror. It's personal horror. It's not at the end of the day the things that Freddy is doing and making them kind of the way he kind of sets them up to make it look as whatever way they were killed. There's a certain resonance that is, especially in that case, very harrowing. You know, and like I say, going back to Freddy's Dead, where he's evoking the abuse of parents, be it physical or sexual.
Yeah,
It's a very deep, unsettling thing that he's doing, that the filmmakers are doing there. But I think it's a wise thing, and I think it's an important thing because it's drawing attention to very serious things that go on in life, unfortunately, that
Yeah.
maybe younger people mightn't be aware, not that they wouldn't be aware of, but they mightn't have a kind of an engagement with, with movies
Hmm.
otherwise. You know what I mean? I mean, that those are the kind of things that it's probably your first consideration of them when you're watching an entertainment like Nightmare on Elm Street. To all of a sudden be presented with very dark things like that, very dark themes.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great thing because it gets people thinking about
Yeah.
horrendous things.
Yeah, like tricks them into addressing things that are like the most uncomfortable aspects of society. Okay, so I gathered from your book, and you kind of brought this up in the interview, that you were not a fan of the 2010 remake. I have conflicted feelings about that, so I wanted to talk to you about why, where you think it went wrong, and if there's any places that you think it went right.
Well, I think it went excuse me. It went wrong in its execution for a start. It's completely style over substance. There's none of the depth of any of the previous films in there at all. It's very on the surface kind of stuff. It's just a stock and slash movie. And as I say, the digital effects I think look terrible. It has this horrible look to it, which is very, I guess, typical of a lot of contemporary horror movies, which is it has this kind of greeny, kind of horrible look to it. Just the cinematography is a very ugly looking movie. The one thing I did like about it is that it did go a bit deeper into kind of the Freddy lore. Now, it didn't do it in great depth or whatever, but it's there. But it's only alluded to, and it's only for the sake of getting you to another terrible kill scene. But I don't
Yeah.
know. It's just I reviewed it actually. I was working for a newspaper at the time, and I reviewed it. And I was excited to again be writing about an Elm Street movie, but the movie was so disappointing that I just, as you'll see in the book, I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about it because it's just a depressing experience and it's just not fun.
Yeah, it was, yeah. I agree with everything you said. I think what I appreciated about it was that they didn't, like, I think this came out around the time there's so many, everything's getting a remake and a reboot, and it's like a lot of the times they don't justify their own existence because, like, you haven't really offered anything different than the original gave me, or you've made it worse. And I think what I appreciated about the 2010 remake, specifically Jackie Early Haley, was had the courage that it must have took to completely turn Freddy Krueger on his head as far as what fans would be expecting from the iconic character that makes that is the, as Robert Englund puts it, the silhouette, the brand, the Mickey Mouse of Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, to take that character and just everything that you would expect, do pretty much the opposite.
That's music to my ears.
I just really like Jackie Early Haley's performance, as jarring as it was, and as Robert Englund is Freddy Krueger, and that Freddy Krueger will always be the best Freddy Krueger.
I am eternal.
But I did appreciate the fact that they tried to at least give us something different, and then, you know, in your book, I love that Robert Englund actually comes out and definitively says Freddy is not a pedophile. He's a child killer. He's killing innocents. He's killing the future. Um, I did like a part of me appreciated that aspect of the 2010 remake too, that they expanded on that and made him even just more unforgivable and irredeemable as a character, and somebody that we shouldn't be laughing at or feeling entertained by. They kind of gave it the Evil Dead treatment, where they just went total dark, and there's nothing redeemable. You should not be idolizing this character. He's meant to terrify you, and he's meant to be a terrible person, and they leaned into that. So I appreciated the conviction, I guess, of the filmmakers, but as a fan of Nightmare on Elm Street, I was disappointed. I think that's how a lot of people must have felt.
Yeah, and I think in terms of casting, you're not going to get any better than Jackie Earle Haley to replace Robert if you're going to do it, because he's a terrific actor.
Yeah.
And you know, in and of itself, his performance is creepy and it's insidious. But it's just a shame that what he's surrounded with, you know, the film and the script and everything, and the look of him as well. I think is he just looks like a rat. It's just
Yeah, yeah, it's like all right, I like it's different. I'll give you that, but different isn't always yeah,
yeah.
like where'd your chin go, man? um so well speaking of casting and let's put Jackie Earle Haley aside since he had his chance. Pretend we live in a world where Robert Englund never existed because I know it's sacrilegious to even ask this question. So in this hypothetical universe, there is no Robert Englund. It's the saddest universe of all the universes. Jackie Earle Haley also is off the table. Is there any other actor, past or present, who you'd be interested in seeing take a swing at Kruger?
I could only really see maybe two or three people who would have the personality and the screen presence to do that. And I'm thinking James Cagney, Robert Blake, maybe Peter
Oh,
Lorre. You know, somebody who have the very distinctive look and cadence to them, but
hmm
who are also very physical in their. Speaking of cats, you know, they kind of have a wiliness to them. You know, kind of a nimble screen presence, which Robert
yeah,
has. But there's something about their face as well, which is distinctive, very distinctive features, you know, and I think that's crucial to Freddy Krueger, even though he's covered in makeup. But that's the great thing about Robert, even though he's caked in makeup and masks or whatever, he's still able to express very
yeah,
vividly his emotions in a scene. And I think you'd have to have someone like, as I say, Cagney, Laurie, Robert Blake, who could pull that off. Now, I would never want to see that. I would never want to see anybody other than Robert England.
yeah.
You know, even that, you know, David Warner was originally supposed to be cast or something like that for Freddy, and David Warner was brilliant, but I don't want him to be Freddy Krueger. He's almost too theatrical. He's too in a classical sense. Robert's theatrical, but in a different way. David Warner has a very classical kind of, you know, almost, I don't know, is he English or was he American? I think he was English. Very British kind of demeanor, you know,
Yeah.
and I don't know. He's an actor. I'm sure he could have made it his
I,
own.
I love that essentially your answer is look, I understand the hypothetical that you presented that we're in a universe without Robert Englund, but instead of using my resources to recast Freddy Krueger, I'm instead going to repurpose those resources into traveling to the universe where Robert Englund actually still exists so this can be made right. I would like to see I mean, just because of his commitment to whatever character he plays, I would be interested to see what Christian Bale would do with a character like Freddy Krueger that is, you know, so embedded in the
Yeah,
fabric of our society, like how he would approach that and what spin he would take on it, and
yeah,
you know, the appearance. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Christian Bale like actually lit himself on fire as a method actor to really like, you know, he likes to embody whatever character he's playing. He's like, I'll get these scars fixed after
yeah.
production wraps, you know. um,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's God, you know, when you think of Robert England in that role, and I think it's just it's everything. It's, you know, you can't pick out one thing. It's the humor, it's the posture, it's his acting chops. It's a mix of everything. And but I think it comes down to his keen intelligence and understanding of Wes's teams. That to me, you know, would be crucial to anybody approaching this, is that they have a kind of an intellectual insight and understanding into what this is all about. And I don't think that the remake would have given Jackie Earle Haley that kind of platform. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Because there's nothing really there for him to dig into on any level other than I'm Freddy Krueger and I'm going to kill you. You know, and
yeah.
I think there's so much more to Freddy Krueger and Robert England, obviously, than that.
Yeah, it did that. I mean, the personality was lacking in such a way that you couldn't. Like, it was inescapable. Like, this doesn't feel like you take the personality out of Freddy, then it's not really Nightmare on Elm Street anymore. It becomes something entirely different.
Yeah.
Who gives a fuck what you think?
Has he ever made an appearance in any of your nightmares?
Man, I never sleep. You wouldn't have enough time to invade my nightmares.
That's, I'm a writer. I don't sleep. Yeah,
I haven't slept in 5 years.
that's
But no, in terms of kind of affecting me in some kind of way, not really, because going back to what I said before, you know, when I was a kid, he enthralled me, he entertained me, you know, he amused me. So I've never had a kind of a like a chilling experience over Freddy, other than the odd scene like the marionette one is kind of say, whoa, that's horrible kind of thing. But no, I've never horror movies in general. I've been watching films for mature audiences long before I should have been, and they've never really affected me like that. They've had the opposite effect on me, in that they've kind of opened me up to the world and kind of made me think about things that I wouldn't have otherwise. But no, I don't think Freddy has ever affected me like that, and which is weird, because I remember actually one time I was talking about horror history, and I was showing an example of Nightmare on Elm Street to a class of teenagers, and there was a couple of kids who were I saw them, they're kind of like hugging each other and kind of shaking, and I thought, wow, they're having such a great time with this horror movie. This is what it's all about, reacting, viscerally, whatever. And then the other teacher in the room said, I think we better turn off this scene. Those kids they're actually like terrified of that moment. I was like, oh shit. I didn't realize that teenagers these days get afraid of old movies like A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, that's
So
weird.
on one hand, I was happy that Freddy still has the power to scare people, but on the other hand, then I realized, well, some people are more sensitive than the others when it comes to watching these things.
Yeah, for me, it was a really I share that sentiment with you, that like I always just felt entertained by Freddie, and like I understood that these things were movies, that these were makeup artists doing amazing jobs, and I appreciated the artistry that went into these films. So it's always been that experience for me too. And like Freddie was just like, he was never somebody, I never felt like Freddie was a threat to me. I always
Mm.
felt like he was just somebody, like I enjoy watching him be a threat to other people, and that's where my relationship with him begins and ends. I knew he was a fictional character, um, but it was, that's why it's so strange to me. I've had one terrifying nightmare in my entire life, and I rarely dream. Um, but this one, it was Freddy. Freddy was in it, and it's just, that's what was so scary to me, is it didn't make sense to me how, like, this guy doesn't scare me, not like this, not like to my core, not like, I'm not, but the dream wasn't funny. I wasn't entertained by him. I was in a house with my family, and only I could see Freddie coming down the road towards our house, and I knew he was coming to come into our house and murder myself and all of my family. So the whole dream, I'm taking furniture and I'm trying to move everything and block all the doors and windows, and I keep looking out there and he's getting closer, and it's just I'm terrified. I'm more terrified than I've ever been in real life or in dream. Uh, and I just feel the impending doom of Freddy approaching. And I can't get the stuff in front of the doors and windows fast enough. And it seems like every time I put something in front of the door, the thing that I had put there before had moved. Like I'm making no progress. And as soon as I do get everything there, I turn around and Freddy's already in the house anyway. And I wake up, and that just, I could have never put two and two together, how like this, it's almost like having a nightmare about your mom, or you love. Like I have nothing but admiration for this character, but then at the same time, I also felt like I've paid my respect in the greatest way possible to Freddie.
Yeah.
Now I've been a sacrifice at his altar. I've allowed him to terrify me. It's just this weird dichotomy with the relationship of Freddie and him scaring and entertaining me and growing up with him, that the nightmare never made sense to me. How
Yeah.
like I'm not afraid of Freddy Krueger, but when I was in that dream, I felt exactly the way the kids did in those movies, and like fanning out in the dream while also being terrified at the same time.
Well, he's a powerful image, man. I mean, just the image of the scissor hands, the knives alone are just, it's a deeply disturbing image in and of itself. And I think, you put the hat on him and the tattered clothes, and yeah, he looks a cross between some guy you might meet down on Skid Row somewhere begging for change, and someone who would invade your dreams and kill you. So yeah,
Yeah,
he ticks
and
all the kind of boxes of what's going to frighten you on a physical level. But then there's the implications of what he represents. Again, to me, it's the physical version of Freddy would never terrify me, but what he represents is very real and very terrifying, which is, as I say, all those things that happen.
so though before we move on from Nightmare on Elm Street, one last question about that particular series. If you could pitch a Nightmare on Elm Street to revive the franchise with Robert Englund on board, what would how would you like to see the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise continued?
Oh man, I'd be such a killjoy. I'd be like, take it back to Freddy's origins. Why did he end up the way he is? You know, almost expand upon like the pilot episode of Freddy's Nightmares, which is all about the trial and being caught and burned and all that. Kind of what they touch upon in the remake. Only do it. I would do it as a serious movie, not as one of the big production number Freddy sequels. Take it back to its serious roots.
Hmm.
What was Freddy like growing up? Why did he become, again, this is touched upon lightly in Freddy's Dead, the abuse of his father and being bullied in school and all that. Take us back to that. What was Springwood like back then? What's it like as a kind of a, on a social level? Because there's obviously some disparity going on, I
Yeah.
think, between the rich and the poor in that town. And there's some kind of element there that it's like as if Freddy is going towards the kind of the kids of the affluent, the kind of the other side of the how would you say, the side of town that he would never be a part of, you
Hmm.
know. But I would love I like a bit of psychological social realism in my movies, even in fantastic horror movies. So that's the way I'd go. Now, what role would Robert play in it? I don't know. Maybe the dad, Freddy's dad or something like that.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think for me, that's the place I would want to see it go, is some kind of backstory that is honorable to Wes Craven and his ideas. That's the way I'd go.
Yeah. I feel like to avoid the pitfall that they ran into at 2010, I think that the next life that that Freddy should see is in the form of like uh, an episodic like a series on net like a I don't know say Netflix series, but some kind of like I think of like Cobra Kai or Stranger Things. The way the like if you have like or like the Freddy's Nightmares series, kind of harken back to that. If there's, I think there's a playground there to have fun with the concept like Nightmare on Elm Street, where it could be, a different. It could follow a group of kids, and each kid has their own episode, their own nightmare. That Freddy's, I think changing the medium that Freddy is reintroduced on would be less offensive to the diehard Nightmare on Elm Street fans that like, okay, you're not remaking the movie, you're
Yeah,
bringing him over to a series.
it's kind of like you're expanding the universe, kind of thing.
Yeah, it would give them the opportunity to really expand on the lore of Freddy and stuff because each episode could be one part expanding on the lore and the history, and one part present day
Yeah,
nightmare teenager. Yeah, and it seems like all the like with the remake of It and Stranger Things, it's like that dynamic of like the 80s experience growing up is making a comeback all over again, where something like that would I guess Nightmare on Elm
yeah.
Street story would fit into the theme of things right now thematically.
That's it. I think if anybody was ever going to go back to Elm Street, the main thing is to be kind of respectful to Wes Craven's intentions with it. I think that
Hmm.
comes down to kind of the teams, to kind of reduce him to just being a kind of a stock and slash kind of figure would be to do a total just this, disjustice to the series, because that's Jason Voorhees, Friday the 13th territory. He's just a guy who kind of hacks teenagers with no kind of no context other than the teenagers are in his woods. I think with Elm Street, there's too many big important ideas in there. The seeds are there for really important ideas, and I think any further investigations or trips down to Elm Street need to kind of honor those. Otherwise,
Yeah,
it's going to be redundant, like the remake, I think.
yeah. I'd love to see Robert Englund step into the shoes one more time. And I feel like he would even require less prosthetics now too. Like he can get into the Freddy getup with just eh, I'm not bashing him in any way, but you get old, you get the wrinkles going on. Well, I'm looking forward to the age and the wisdom that looks like you come to old being an old
Yeah.
begrudging looking man. But yeah, I mean, I think he's still got the physical prowess to bring Freddy to life, and
Well, yeah,
why not?
I could see he'd have the gusto to do it justice. He still has And as I say, from talking to him, he's just, that man is so full of life and ideas that,
Yeah,
Jesus, yeah, it'd be a
it'd be a
shame for
dream.
him not to do it again one more time, maybe. But as long as the movie's good, I think that's the
Yeah.
main.
Yeah, that would be a terrible way to like tarnish the like, what happened in 2010, the silver lining is that Robert Englund's name wasn't on it, Wes
Yes.
Craven's name wasn't on it. So there's no like true legacy tarnished by the mishap that happened there. But yeah, it'd be a shame for Robert Englund's last role of Freddy to be lackluster.
Oh, yeah.
It would have to be superb. Um, okay, well, moving on from just a few final questions before
Yeah.
we say goodbye. For fellow writers out there, aspiring writers, what advice would you offer them? I know there's probably tons of things that you could say, but is there like a particular hurdle or mistake that you had to go through in order to learn the right way to do something, or something that maybe you could spare other filmmakers out there?
This is going to sound facetious, but I think the most important advice I could give anybody is to write. And I don't mean practice writing or practice, your grammar. I'm talking about write the damn book that you want to buy. You know what I mean? Think of it like that. If there's something that you want to put on your shelf and it's just not there, it's not, nobody it doesn't look as if anybody's going to write it. Just write it yourself. You can worry about the editing and the grammar and this and that and the other as you go along, and you learn all that. But just put the pen to paper. I mean, that's the one thing I guess I probably wish I would have done sooner. But then again, I didn't have the impetus because I thought you had to do it this structural way, which is to be good and go to college and get your degree, and then you can say, "Oh, I can do it now because I have a degree," which is complete and utter bullshit. It's like independent filmmakers or musicians. You don't need a degree to pick up a guitar and play three chords, nor do you need a degree to pick up a camera and make a movie. You just do it, And I would say don't let college administrators, don't let friends or family or anybody else tell you can't do it, because listen, the one thing we are armed with in this life is words, and the only thing you actually need to write a book is either paper or a computer. That's doable,
Yeah.
most of the time. So we're lucky in that sense. We don't need a whole lot of equipment to actually write the book. We need people to help us get it out there and promote it and things like that. But yeah, just write, because I get a lot of people who ask me, man, how do you get a publishing deal? How do you release books and blah blah blah? And I say, well, what have you written? And sometimes it's nothing. Well, you're never going to get published if you don't write a book, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. That seems to be a common theme too, with like whether it be filmmakers or writers or anything like that. It's just that just do it. Just stay in practice. Even if what you're doing is terrible right now, just keep doing it. Like if you're a writer, then write. If you're a
Yeah,
filmmaker, then make films. Don't wait on somebody to give you permission. Just go do it.
absolutely. And break the rules, approach publishers and approach editors, and look up names of editors who have edited books that you like, or
Yeah.
that maybe are similar team or whatever, and approach them and say, hey, listen, I've written a book, do you want to take a look at it? You might get told no, and you just move on to the next one. But just make that first leap. That's the main thing, is to just write the book and approach people and do whatever you can. I wouldn't be here talking to you if I didn't have I don't know what you'd call it. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't know how to write a book. I didn't know how to form a sentence barely, but I just did it and somebody liked it. So
Yeah, and I think the other important thing is not being afraid to make something that sucks, because like I've seen so many issues with filmmakers. They're like, I really want to get it like exactly right. Like it's never going to be exactly right, man.
yeah,
Just don't be afraid to fail. Like put it out there, fall on your face. You'll try that much harder next time. You'll learn your lesson from the mistakes. Like if you don't make mistakes, it's really hard to learn lessons. At least for
yeah,
me, like I've got to fall in the shit in order to to realize that I don't want to be in the shit.
exactly. Yeah, fail upwards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Learn from your mistakes as you ascend the ladder, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's great advice. I know that you have some other books. I mentioned that you mentioned there's two other books I'd like to let the audience know about. You wrote a biography that you mentioned, Burt Reynolds. That's called Burt Reynolds on Screen, and you co-wrote a book with Nick McLean. He's been on our show a few times. I have him and David McGifford actually to thank for finally watching the film, being there. Uh, that book is called Nick McLean Behind the Camera: The Life and Works of a Hollywood Cinematographer. Um, so, aspiring cinematographers and fans of Burt Reynolds, you can also find those books in most places that you get your books. Um, are you currently I know you mentioned you're working on something right now. Is there anything that you could share about that, or any other
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my new book, Walter Hill, The Cinema of a Hollywood Maverick, is due out within the next 4 to 6 weeks. So yeah, a little over a month's time, I'll have another new book that
nice?
I'll be talking about. And I literally just signed off on that the other day. I proofread it. It's all approved. It's next stop is the printing press. But I'm straight into finishing another book, which is Hired Guns, Women of the Road and On Record in Alternative Music. So that's going to be the next one that comes out. So that's going to be released next year. So I'm straight into work now on
Awesome.
finishing that with my co-author Amanda. So that's kind of something new for me in terms of it's a music-oriented book, it's not film. So, but Amanda kind of brought me into her world on that one because she's a professional musician. She's played with some amazing bands down the years. So I'm kind of stepping out of my comfort zone of cinema here to work with Amanda. But I love her, so it's just an enjoyable experience, and it's turned out to be a really great book.
Your fan base must be really interesting because, like, with most, like, you have like your like Michael Crichton, Stephen King's. They're like, everybody that reads a Stephen King or gets into Stephen King, they're into Stephen King and they follow Stephen King. But like, you're writing things that are like a Venn diagram of like, you have like the Nightmare on Elm Street fan base, the Burt Reynolds fan base, the Nick McLean fan base. Do you do you like do you have any interaction with your fans as far as like experiencing the diversity and the all over the placeness
Yeah,
of your fan base?
absolutely. Yeah, it's been wonderful because say for example with the Elm Street fans, when they're into it, I find this with horror genre anyway, when they're into something, they're into it. It's hardcore. And I've met some really wonderful people who've like traveled to come meet me somewhere just to get something signed, a poster or a book or whatever. And like they'll be showing me, their little kind of Elm Street trinkets, whether it's a little Freddy kind of a doll or whatever it is. And so there's this kind of a sense of wanting to share with
Mhm.
somebody who understands that love. You know what I mean? And it's always wonderful. And they send me pictures of themselves with the book or the poster that I've signed for them or something like that. You know what I mean? And that's always a really nice feeling. And it's different with every book. Every fan base is different. Let's say for example, Burt Reynolds and Nick McLean. That's a different generation you're talking about. Like when Nick McLean, he covers like the '80s blockbusters like The Goonies, Short Circuit, but also he has done the '70s classics like The Deer Hunter and Being There and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, stuff like that. So each book brings its own kind of set of fans, and of course, they're generally fans of the people or the work I'm writing about. But over time, I've kind of grown my own kind of fan base who likes my writing style or whatever it is, and I always
Well,
look forward to
that,
that.
and there's just that. Like, I know when I was reading this, like, I felt there's automatically a link for us because I'm attracted to this book because I'm a huge fan of Nightmare on Elm Street, and then a few pages into the book, there's an automatic connection to you because, like, wow, this guy feels exactly the same way about this thing that I love that he also loves. So there's like, you're establishing a relationship with anybody. Like, if somebody's coming into me, their introduction to you as a Burt Reynolds book, it's like,
Yeah,
well, that you already have, so you're coming into that with something in common with the reader. That's really cool. The connection is
yeah.
like made
It's a,
preambly.
it is a lovely feeling, you know what I mean? Because there's almost a kind of it gets rid of maybe the kind of awkward first stages of a conversation with someone when they know what you're about, they know what you're into, and they can just immediately share the love of your subject or whatever it is, and they
Yeah.
feel comfortable. They feel comfortable enough to kind of share their experiences of that subject with you. And one of the important things was, again, with this book, by approaching it the way I did in terms of the themes and all that, was to kind of, because I know the fan base for these movies, a lot of them are younger kids or they're teenagers, whatever it is. And I really wanted to draw attention to those important themes that the series is about, those
Hmm.
elements that we talked about earlier on, which are important things in life in general. And I think sometimes they get overlooked when in general discourse of Elm Street, but I wanted to draw attention to them with this book. So, kids can kind of recognize maybe something, younger people in general, not kids, but they can recognize something, if not their lives, but life in general in there. That this is
Yeah.
not just some kind of fantasy boogeyman story. It's about life, and it's about real things that goes on in life. And that's an important thing, I think. But
Yeah.
in terms of like fan base, I mean, I went on tour. We did kind of a promotional tour with Nick in Ireland before the book came out. And my God, everywhere we went around the country, Goonies fans queuing around the block to meet him and to get autographs or whatever. Every place we went, the Goonies, they love it.
They never die.
Goonies never die.
Yeah. Um, before we say goodbye, I just want to one more time. I want to thank David McGifford out loud for putting us in touch and being such a great person in general. His book, want to mention it. It actually went it went out. The pre-orders went out today, so it's officially out in the world as of today. Best Seat in the House. You can get a little sneak peek into what that book is about by checking out another series on this channel called Best Seat with David McGifford, where we kind of go through that. There's one episode available right now. I think there might be two by the time this post, September 19th. Is there anything that you? I mean, you kind of already went into McGifford and your feelings about him. Is there anything else that you'd like to share on
Well,
that subject?
I do want to talk a little bit more about David, because he's just been a great part of my life the last 2 years. And it's because of Nick, it's because of these books that sometimes you meet people on these books and it's an instant connection, and you become, firm friends. And I've gotten so many people who are like, you have to come over to the States and stay with me for a week, all this kind of thing, which is so, Jesus, they trust me that much, that they feel comfortable to kind of do that. And it's just such a wonderful thing. It's not something I ever expected would become part of this, that to make such really good, I presume, lifelong friends out of this. And it's really been one of the wonderful things. Writing has changed my life. If not, forget about the books being published or if they do well critically or whatever, but just the people you meet and the quality of life that brings is just, I cannot describe it. And David McGifford and Nick McLean are just two examples of that. And David's wonderful. He came to me because he approached Nick for some advice on publishing a book, because our book had just come out. I think David read it and just reached out to him. They went to high school together, but I don't think they'd met or talked in the intervening years. And Nick said, you need to contact Wayne, So I got an email or text message out of the blue, and I think we set up a call, a Zoom or something like that. And just straight away, we just clicked. And of course, I knew all of David's work, and it wasn't just a case of, I know Back to the Future or I know Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I knew all those deep cuts from Empire of the Ants, to Made in Heaven, everything in between. And some of those Bright Lights, Big City, I love. So for him to send me his manuscript then, which was kind of, I would say it was half a manuscript in terms of just length and word count, so I was kind of like, okay, I'll criticize it, I'll give you some notes, whatever. First thing, I think we need to expand some of the sections. And that was just me being greedy, because I wanted to know more about these movies, but also because I wanted to help David show that he could expand upon these movies, certain movies like Bright Lights, Big City, because there are people out there who would like to know more, because it's not the kind of movie that's written about very often. I mean, Back to the Future has a lot of literature and documentaries on it. So he probably doesn't have to go in too much detail there. But I was like, give us a bit more about working with Gordon Willis on Bright Lights, Big City, little things like that, and working with Alan Rudolph on Songwriter and Made in Heaven.
Yeah.
I just thought this could be a great movie book, and it's the kind of movie book I would buy in a heartbeat. And I'm just so proud that he has gotten it to publication, because I said to him all along, this will be published one way or another. We will get this published because it needs to be on a shelf. Film fans will eat this up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what I love about David's writing as well, and the book, is it feels like David as you're reading it. It's so easygoing. It's not dry prose. It's very conversational. It's, yourself, I don't know if you've read it, but it's kind of snippets. kind of
Yeah.
like almost like,
Anecdotal.
yeah, journal entries or something like that.
Hmm.
So it's very easy read, and he kind of glides through this 40-year career of working on some of the best movies of American cinema of the last 40 years with such ease and without any kind of fanfare. Like he's friends with Sidney Pollack and Tom Cruise and Paul Newman, but he doesn't play it up. You know what I mean? He doesn't, exploit that for kind of easy pages.
Yeah.
It is what it is, and it kind of a fascinating book as well because it gives you an insight into what an assistant director does, which is kind of one of those things that people might say, well, what does an assistant director do? So
Hmm.
this book spells it out entirely, and it's wonderful. David's wonderful. I love the man. I love Nick. So I'm just so grateful for my books giving me the opportunity to meet and become friends with these people who have given me so much. They've given me a life. I don't know what the hell I'd be doing if I wasn't writing books these days, because film gave me that. Film was my education, and
Yeah.
getting to kind of give back to these filmmakers in some way by writing a book about them or drawing attention to them or certain films that weren't so popular. I'm blessed to be able to do it, and blessed to call the likes of David and Nick and Tom friends.
Well, those are perfectly, beautifully spoken words. The cinema. I mean, no surprise here. You're a writer. You have a way with words, sir. That was very well said. I won't even elaborate on that because I'll just what you said. Yes, I agree. I concur. Everything that you just said, perfectly put. Um, there's for. Is there any parting words that you'd like to leave the audience with as a final thought?
When you're watching a movie, look beyond the surface, because I would say if a director is of any worth and intelligent, there's a lot more between the frames than you realize. And I think that applies a lot to the Elm Street movies. You can approach them and just enjoy them as entertaining horror movies, but look beyond that surface and try and find what is the director really saying about life, about society, about the good things and the bad things that happen in the world. And look what it did for me by looking beyond the surface into Elm Street. I wrote a book about it. So
That's awesome. And yes, if you're watching this right now, you made it to this part of the interview. That means that you are without a doubt a fan of Nightmare on Elm Street. You should have this book, Welcome to Elm Street, Wayne Byrne. That is available wherever you get your books, along with Wayne's other works. Catch up on those now before his other two books come out in the next 2 years. Wayne, thank you very much for taking the time. This has been, I mean, I could easily talk for a whole 12 hours about Nightmare on Elm Street and all things that, but it's been such a pleasure talking to you. And finally, this is, I mean, David McGifford has brought you up. It had to be almost a year and a half ago. So I feel like this has been a long time in the making, and it's cool to finally sit down and do it.
Oh, well, thanks to David and thanks to you, man. I really appreciate it. Thanks for just giving me a chance to talk about these little books of mine.
Yeah, thank you. All the best, man, and I hope you feel better coming off of the flu and all that. Although I don't know about you, but I after the whole COVID mess, like I said, I had the flu last week. It kind of felt good having a good old traditional cold, not the yeah. It's like yes, just the normal stuff, like the good old days.
Regular old virus, none of that COVID
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. All right, man. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Take care, sir.
All right.